Welcome to Cleared for Takeoff, brought to you by Viera Tech, your go-to podcast for aviation news, special topics, and beyond. Let's soar into the stories shaping the skies. Strap in as Brian and Jen provide an interesting take on aircraft retirements.
Welcome back, everyone. We're tackling something today that I know a lot of you have been curious about. What happens to those big, beautiful airplanes once they're well done flying?
It's a really good question, and it's particularly relevant right now.
Oh, yeah. Why is that?
Well, the whole aviation industry is kind of going through this massive refresh, upgrading their fleets.
You mean like getting rid of the old planes?
Yeah, exactly. Airlines have to juggle a ton of factors, economic stuff, new technology.
And even the environmental impact, too, right?
Absolutely. All of this is pushing them to make tough decisions about which planes to retire, when, and why.
I mean, looking at all the stuff you guys send in, articles, reports, even some airline announcements, it's clear you're all really fascinated by this whole world of aircraft retirements. We see airlines retiring entire fleets of certain types of planes, like massive orders for hundreds of new aircraft coming in. And, let's not forget those few airline bankruptcies this year. Those really shook things up.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because it's not like an old car, right? You don't just see a plane on the side of the road with a for sale sign on it.
So true. Okay, so imagine you're on a flight and you're like, this plane feels a little vintage. The seats aren't as comfy. Maybe the entertainment system is a bit, shall we say, retro.
Oh, for sure. Passenger comfort is a part of it. But airlines are businesses, right? So ultimately, it comes down to dollars and cents. They got to consider rising fuel costs, those maintenance bills that just keep going up, and what kind of planes are in demand, you know what I mean?
Right, because if people aren't booking tickets on those older planes, airlines are going to take notice. And speaking of costs, a bunch of these articles we got really highlighted how sustainability is a big factor, too. Like, airlines are realizing those old planes can guzzle fuel.
Oh, totally. So investing in new fuel-efficient models, it's a win-win. Good for the planet and their bottom line.
Makes total sense. And we can't forget about technology, right? All those fancy computer systems that help pilots, those are constantly getting upgraded.
Yeah, avionics, they're called. Airlines want the newest, best tech, so those older planes, they start to look less and less appealing.
Think of it like your phone, right? Who wants to be stuck with a 10-year-old model when there are sleek new ones with all the bells and whistles? No one. And while we're on the topic of appealing, another thing airlines really like is having a consistent fleet.
Totally. Fleet standardization, it's like their secret weapon. Makes things so much simpler. Like, take Southwest Airlines, for example. They're pretty much all about the Boeing 737.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I feel like every time I fly Southwest, it's a 737, so what's the advantage of that?
It's huge. Maintenance is way easier if all your planes are the same. Same goes for pilot training. Just smoother operations all around,
It's like having a uniform keeps everything nice and organized. But it does make me wonder, what happens to all those planes that do get retired? Do they just, end up in some massive airplane graveyard in the desert?
That's a common image, right? Not quite that simple, though. There's a whole industry dedicated to taking those planes apart, recycling what they can, and trying to squeeze out as much value as possible.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. So they don't just go to waste.
Not if they can help it. Retired aircraft, they're packed with valuable stuff, aluminum, titanium, even those fancy carbon fiber composites they use nowadays.
So they're really trying to recycle as much as possible.
As much as they can. But it's not always easy. There's hazardous materials to deal with, like lead and asbestos. Nobody wants that stuff leaking into the environment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Got to handle that stuff carefully.
For sure. And recycling those carbon fiber composites, not as easy as melting down aluminum, needs special processes, and honestly, the technology's still catching up.
So sounds like lots of potential, but some real challenges to figure out.
Exactly. And keep in mind, this isn't some small-scale thing. We're talking big numbers. The International Air Transport Association, IATA, they say over 16,000 commercial aircraft have been retired in the past 35 years.
Wow, that's a lot of planes.
And it doesn't stop there. They're predicting another 11,000 will retire in the next decade. So, yeah, figuring out how to recycle these things responsibly, it's going to be more and more important.
Absolutely. And with all these planes getting retired, we're seeing airlines announce which specific types they're phasing out, sometimes even entire fleets. This is where it gets juicy, right?
Totally. Let's start with American Airlines. They've announced plans to retire all of their 50-seat regional jets by 2030. Those little Embraer 145s, and Bombardier CRJ-200s.
I can't say I'm surprised. Those smaller planes, they're not exactly known for being fuel efficient or spacious for that matter. Seems like a smart move to swap them out for something newer and more eco-friendly.
It is, but it's not just the small planes getting the boot. American is also retiring some of its larger, older aircraft like Boeing 757s, more CRJ-200s, Boeing 767s, Airbus A340-200s, even their Embraer E190s. They're really going all in on this fleet renewal.
Whoa, that's a big change. So what about Delta? What are they doing?
Delta's getting in on the action, too. They're phasing out their Boeing 777-200LRs and those older McDonnell Douglas MD-88s and MD-90s, swapping them for newer, more fuel-efficient planes like the Airbus A350-900.
Seems like everyone's going for the A350. Definitely seeing a trend here. And United, are they following suit?
United's taking a bit of a different route. They're storing some of their Boeing 767-400ERs and 757s for now.
Storing them. What does that mean?
Basically, they're keeping them around, just in case. They're waiting to see how things play out, what kind of demand there'll be for those types of planes in the future.
Makes sense. Got to be prepared. Okay, so we've got American, Delta, and United all making changes. Any other airlines doing interesting stuff?
There are a few standouts. Alaska Airlines, they're retiring their Airbus A319s, making room for newer planes. And then there's Asiana Airlines. They're saying goodbye to their last Boeing 747-400s.
Oh, the 747, such a classic. I'm sure a lot of people have fond memories of flying on those jumbo jets.
They were definitely something special. Japan Airlines is also retiring some of its Boeing 777-200ERs. Shows it's not always just about age. Sometimes it's about having the right plane for the right route, or adapting to changes in how people are traveling.
So strategic. And Scandinavian Airlines, they're going all in on modernization, retiring their entire Boeing 737 fleet.
Yep, pretty bold move. Could mean they're switching teams to Airbus, or maybe looking at newer, more fuel-efficient models from Boeing.
Guess they have the game, right?
Yeah.
Any other examples of entire fleets biting the dust?
TUI Airways is saying goodbye to its last Boeing 767, another classic aircraft type.
So many farewells to these planes that have been around for ages. It's a little sad, but it also shows how aviation is always changing, always trying to be more efficient and eco-friendly.
Exactly. Those workhorses of the sky, they eventually reach their limit. Now, we've talked a lot about airlines making these decisions, but they're not the only ones at the table, right? Governments have a big say in all this, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Rules, regulations, they can really shape what airlines can and can't do. I'm curious, what kind of influence do governments have on aircraft retirements?
Oh, a huge influence. Governments, they set the rules of the game, basically. Like here in the U.S., we have rules about when pilots have to retire.
Really? I didn't know that. What's the age limit for pilots?
65. So if an airline has a lot of pilots nearing that age, they might have to retire some of their planes sooner, especially if those planes need more experienced pilots to fly them safely.
Wow, that's interesting. So even if the plane's in good shape, they might retire it because they don't have enough pilots who can fly it.
Exactly. And it's not just pilots. Air traffic controllers, they have a mandatory retirement age too, 56 in the U.S. Might not seem like it's related to planes, but it can have a knock-on effect.
How so? I'm not really seeing the connection there.
Well, if you have fewer air traffic controllers, it can put a strain on the system, right? Could lead to delays. Maybe some routes aren't as feasible anymore. And that can influence which planes airlines decide to keep flying and which ones they decide to retire.
It's like a chain reaction, huh? One thing leads to another.
Totally. And while regulations can sometimes feel like a pain, governments also offer incentives to encourage airlines to do things like invest in more fuel-efficient planes and adopt more eco-friendly practices.
Ah, so it's not all stick. There's some carrot, too. What kind of incentives are we talking about?
A lot of countries offer tax breaks to airlines that buy fuel-efficient aircraft, kind of recognizing that those investments are good for the environment. Some places even give subsidies for scrapping old planes, making it easier to upgrade to newer models.
So it's like a trade-in program for your old gas guzzler, but for airlines.
Yeah.
Smart way to nudge them in the right direction.
Exactly. And some governments are really going all in, putting money into research for sustainable aviation technologies.
Like what? I'm always fascinated by this kind of stuff.
Well, there's a lot of research happening on alternative fuels, like biofuels made from plants or even waste materials. And then there's the really exciting stuff, electric and hydrogen-powered planes. Those could really change the game down the line.
Wow, that's some serious next-level stuff. Okay, so we've talked about how old a plane feels, those creaky seats, the outdated entertainment system. But how do we actually measure how old a plane is? It's not like checking the mileage, right?
Nope, not quite. We measure an aircraft's age by how much it's been used. Think flight cycles and flight hours.
Flight cycles, what are those?
A flight cycle is one takeoff and landing. Makes sense, right? Each cycle puts stress on the plane's structure, and then flight hours are just the total time the aircraft has spent in the air.
So a plane that's constantly doing short flights will rack up a lot of cycles, even if it hasn't flown that many hours overall.
Exactly. And those frequent takeoffs and landings, they can really wear a plane down, especially those narrow-body jets we all fly on for shorter trips.
So how long do those narrow bodies usually last?
They're built to last anywhere from 25 to 45 years and can typically handle 30,000 to 50,000 flight cycles.
That's a lot of flights. What about those bigger jets, the ones for long international flights? Do they last longer?
They do tend to have a longer lifespan. They're not going through as many takeoffs and landings. They can rack up well over 100,000 flight hours and 20,000 to 30,000 cycles.
It's like marathon runners versus sprinters, right?
Exactly. But just like athletes, even those long-haul planes need proper care to stay in shape. Maintenance is key to keeping them flying safely and for as long as possible.
It's like a well-maintained classic car, right? It can still be running smoothly even after decades.
Absolutely. And there are some amazing examples out there. Think about the DC-3, a plane designed in the 1930s. Some of those are still flying today, thanks to incredible maintenance.
Wow, that's impressive. But it's not just the plane itself, right? The engines, they must be super complicated and need special attention too.
You got it. Those jet engines are incredible pieces of engineering, but they go through a lot. High temperatures, immense pressure, the whole works. They need regular overhauls to make sure they're running safely and efficiently.
So it's not just a matter of topping off the fluids and giving them a wash.
Nope, it's a big job. During an overhaul, they take the whole engine apart, check every single piece, replace worn-out parts, test everything. It's a huge undertaking.
How often does that happen?
It depends on the type of engine and what the manufacturer recommends. For those narrow bodies, the first big overhaul is usually after about 12,000 flight cycles.
Okay, so a decent amount of flying before they need a major tune-up. And then what? How often do they need it after that?
Usually the time between overhauls gets shorter. They might need another one after 8,000 cycles, then another after 4,000, and so on. It's like going to the doctor more often as you get older. More checkups to make sure everything is running smoothly.
Makes sense. And I bet those overhauls aren't cheap. Must be a big expense for airlines.
Oh yeah, they're a big part of the cost of keeping an older plane flying. Sometimes it makes more financial sense to retire a plane and invest in a newer model with engines that need less maintenance.
Speaking of older planes, you mentioned earlier that airlines don't usually advertise how old their planes are.
Yeah.
Any tips for our listeners on how to find that information?
There are websites out there that track this stuff. It's like Carfax, but for airplanes. Planespotters.net is one example.
Wait, really? You can look up a specific plane?
You bet. Search by the plane's tail number, that unique code they all have. You can find out its age, where it was built, who's owned it, even places it's flown, and any interesting events in its history.
That's so cool. I'm definitely checking that out next time I fly. But in general, how do we define an old plane?
Well, a brand new aircraft is usually one that's 10 years old or less. That's like the latest and greatest cutting-edge tech and design. A standard aircraft is typically between 10 and 20 years old.
Still in its prime, right?
Yep. Still got plenty of life left. Anything over 20 years old is generally considered an older aircraft. Of course, with good maintenance, they can still be perfectly safe and reliable.
So next time I'm on a flight, I can try to guess how old the plane is based on the interior and stuff. It's like a little aviation detective game.
Exactly. Now, while all this talk of ages and engines is interesting, we can't forget about the environment, right? Everyone's thinking about their carbon footprint these days, and it's natural to wonder what happens to all that metal and material when a plane is retired.
For sure. It's a big question. Like, can we actually recycle those giant planes?
It's a big challenge, but there are definitely opportunities. Think about all that aluminum and titanium in a plane. Those are highly recyclable material.
Right, so we don't have to mine new materials, which is good for the planet.
Exactly. It's a step towards a more circular economy where we reuse and recycle as much as possible. But of course, recycling a plane isn't as easy as tossing an aluminum can in the bin.
What are some of the challenges?
Well, for starters, planes have hazardous materials in them. Lead, asbestos, things like that. We got to make sure that stuff is disposed of properly so it doesn't pollute the environment.
Yeah, safety first. What else makes it tricky?
Some materials are just harder to recycle than others. Carbon fiber composites, which are super strong and lightweight, they're becoming more common in planes, but recycling them is still a work in progress.
So not as straightforward as melting down aluminum.
Nope. The technology's still catching up. And then there's the issue of flame retardants. Those chemicals they use in the cabin interiors, they're essential for safety, but some of them aren't so great for the environment. Gotta handle those carefully, too.
So it's complicated, lots of potential, but also some hurdles to overcome.
Absolutely. But it's not all bad news. There are some really positive things happening in the industry.
Like what? Tell me there's some hope for those retired planes.
There is. One big trend is component refurbishment. Instead of just scrapping parts, they're finding ways to give them a second life.
So they're like fixing up old engines and stuff instead of throwing them away?
Yep. Engines, landing gear, even those complex avionics systems, a lot of it can be refurbished to like new condition and used in other planes. It's a win-win. Reduces waste, saves resources, and can even be cheaper than buying brand new parts.
Love that. What other good stuff is happening?
Airlines are also getting better at diverting waste from landfills, finding ways to recycle or responsibly dispose of things that can't be reused. It's about minimizing the overall impact, you know?
Right, because even if we can't perfectly recycle everything, we can still try to reduce the amount of stuff that ends up in landfills.
Exactly. And remember, this isn't just a problem in one country, it's a global issue. Remember those numbers from IATA? Over 16,000 aircraft retired already, and another 11,000 on the way in the next 10 years.
It's mind-blowing, really, the scale of it all.
It really highlights the need for sustainable solutions. We have to get this right.
Agreed. Okay, so we've talked about the nuts and bolts of retiring a plane, the economics of it, the environmental concerns. But there's another side to this, right? A more emotional side.
Oh, for sure. These machines, they've connected people and places for so long, there's a certain sentimental value there.
Like the 747, right? Those jumbo jets are slowly disappearing, and I think a lot of people feel a sense of loss about that.
It's understandable. These aircraft, they're more than just machines. They represent a history of innovation, of adventure, of bringing people together.
They've carried millions of passengers across continents, created countless memories.
Exactly. They've shaped how we see the world. But even though it's natural to feel nostalgic, we also have to recognize that progress is important. The aviation industry needs to keep moving forward, keep innovating.
It's about honoring the past, but also looking towards the future.
Exactly. Celebrating those amazing planes while also embracing the next generation of aircraft, the ones that will continue to connect our world.
I love that. And it really feels like that's what this whole conversation is about. The past, present, and future of aviation.
Well said. And it's not just about the planes themselves, right? It's about the people who design them, build them, fly them, maintain them, and of course the people who fly on them.
The passengers without whom none of this would even exist.
Exactly. It's a whole ecosystem, and aircraft retirement is just one piece of that puzzle. But it's a fascinating piece, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And one that I think we've only just begun to explore. Yeah, it's amazing to think about all these different aspects we've touched on. Really shows how interconnected everything is in the aviation world.
You said it. It's like a chain reaction.
Yeah.
Pilot retirements impacting which planes get retired, air traffic control staffing affecting flight schedules, even government policies nudging airlines towards greener practices. It's all connected.
And it's constantly changing, too. New technology pops up, rules change, the market shifts. The aviation industry has got to be on its toes all the time, adapting to all these moving parts.
For sure. And it makes you realize something like retiring an airplane, it's not as simple as it might seem. There's a lot of thought and planning that goes into those decisions, and they have consequences that ripple outwards.
Right. Like we've been talking about, those choices affect the environment, the economy, jobs. It's a big responsibility. And it seems like airlines are becoming more aware of that, trying to make choices that are good for the long haul.
Absolutely. And speaking of long haul, you brought up those big orders airlines have been placing for new planes, like Indigo and Air India. They're buying tons of new aircraft. I'm curious, what do you think that means for the whole retirement process?
Well, those mega orders, they're definitely a sign that airlines are betting on the future of air travel, right?
Yeah.
They're investing in modernization, which is great. But it also means figuring out how to retire those older planes responsibly. And that can be tricky.
It's a balancing act for sure. Brings up some interesting questions, too. Can airlines retire the older planes as fast as they're bringing in new ones? What happens to the market for used aircraft? Do we see more planes just sitting around or even getting scrapped before their time? Lots to think about.
definitely highlights the importance of having a good plan for those retired planes. Like we talked about, recycling is great, but there are challenges. We got to make sure those planes don't end up just abandoned somewhere, causing environmental problems.
You got it. Transparency and accountability, those are key. The industry needs to be upfront about what's happening to those retired aircraft and make sure they're handled in a way that minimizes their environmental impact.
I think this has been such an eye-opening look into the world of aircraft retirements. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but it's clear this is a complex and constantly evolving area, one that's super important for the future of aviation.
Couldn't agree more. We've covered so much, from the technical stuff about how planes age, to the economic factors driving retirements, the environmental challenges, and even that bit of nostalgia we all feel when we see those classic planes disappearing from the skies.
It's definitely been a journey.
Yeah.
And to all of you listening, thank you for coming along with us. We hope you've learned something new, maybe sparked some curiosity about this fascinating side of the aviation industry. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and we'll catch you next time.